Let's just dive right in with a huge question. Is the world you see and touch the world you experience every day? Is it objectively real, or is it maybe just a construction of your mind? Today, we're jumping into the deep end of the debate between realism and anti-realism. I want you to think for a second about the chair you're sitting on right now. Go ahead. Is that a real object? Does it have properties that exist completely outside of you, outside of your mind? Or is it just an idea, a label we've all agreed on? Now, this might sound like a weird question, but it's actually at the heart of a major philosophical battle. And believe me, the answer has huge implications for, well, everything. So, to get to the bottom of this, here's our game plan. First, we're going to define what we're even talking about. Then, we'll put reality to the test with a couple of thought experiments. After that, we'll look at the absolutely incredible success of science, tackle a big challenge to realism, and then finally, we'll connect it all to a much, much bigger picture. All right, first up, let's define the battle lines. What do we actually mean when we say realism versus anti-realism? It basically breaks down like this. On one side, you have realism, specifically what we call scientific realism. This view says there's a world out there that exists whether we're thinking about it or not, whether we have a word for it or not. And the whole point of science is to discover the truth about that world. Then, on the other side, you have anti-realism. This view argues that what we call reality is actually a product of our minds, our language, or our social agreements. For an anti-realist, a scientific theory isn't really true, it's just a useful fiction that helps us get by. Now, the debate gets really intense when we start talking about unobservables. We can all pretty much agree that a rock is a rock. But what about gravity, or an electron, or an atom? We can't see them with our own eyes. So are they real things that our theories are describing, or are they just helpful concepts we invented to make the math work? That is the core of the question. Okay, so let's move away from the abstract for a minute and get really concrete. How can we test if the world is actually independent of our minds? Well, let's run a simple and maybe a little painful experiment. So I want you to imagine a fire is burning right there in front of you. An anti-realist might say that the hotness of that fire is just a concept, right? It's just an idea in your head, a social construct. Okay, let's put that theory to the test. The logic here is pretty simple. If the fire is just an idea, then my belief about it should control what happens. I should be able to just believe it won't burn me. But what happens when I actually do the experiment? When I reach out and touch that flame? I get burned every single time. And you know what? If you were sitting next to me and you touched it, you'd get burned too. And this is the crucial point right here. Reality pushes back. The fire is hot and it doesn't care one bit what you or I believe about it. That shared, predictable, painful outcome is powerful, powerful evidence that the fire exists totally independently of our minds. Okay, but the anti-realists, they have another move. They might come back and say, sure, the thing exists, but our language is what constructs our reality of it. So let's see about that. Does changing the word actually change the thing itself? Let's take that same fire, but this time let's just change its name. Let's invent a new word for it. How about Furre? And for a new word, we're going to define Furre as only describing the orange color of the flame, not the heat. So on one hand, you've got the real thing, fire, with all its physical properties. And on the other hand, you've got our made-up label, Furre. And this just perfectly illustrates the point. If I stick my hand into the fur, thinking, oh, this is just about an orange color, well, I'm going to get a very painful, very real surprise. I would be shocked, literally, to find out there's a lot more to fur than just its color. My fancy new definition did absolutely nothing to change the object's real properties. You see, language describes reality, it doesn't create. This brings us to what might be the single strongest argument for realism. It's often called the miracle argument, and it basically asks a really simple question. Why in the world does science work so well? I mean, just stop and think about it. Our scientific theories about things we can't even see, like electrons and electromagnetic fields, allow us to build the smartphone in your pocket. Our understanding of gravity lets us predict an eclipse down to the very second. Our germ theory lets us cure diseases that used to wipe out populations. How is any of this possible if our theories are just made-up useful fictions? This quote just nails it. The incredible success, the predictive power, the technological application of science,
It would have to be a miracle of cosmic proportions if it were all just a series of lucky guesses. It's just way too successful to be a coincidence.
So this leads us to something philosophers call an inference to the best explanation. And it's pretty simple. The best, most rational explanation for why science works so incredibly well is that its theories are actually true, or at least approximately true, descriptions of how the world really is. It's not a miracle. It's just that science is actually figuring things out about what's really out there.
If we reject this idea, we run into what you could call the green cheese problem. If theories don't have to connect to reality, then anything goes. Any theory is as good as any other, as long as we find it useful. We could just as easily say the moon is made of green cheese, put there by cosmic mice. To avoid that kind of complete absurdity, science has to be aiming to describe the real properties of the universe. But to be fair, there is a major challenge that anti-realists love to bring up, and it actually comes from the history of science itself. It's this idea of paradigm shifts. The argument, which is famously associated with the philosopher Thomas Kuhn, is that science doesn't really get closer to the truth over time. It just sort of hops between different incompatible worldviews or paradigms. So when Einstein's theory of gravity came along and replaced Newton's, the anti-realist would say we didn't get closer to the truth. We just swapped one useful story for another one. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how science actually works. Take gravity, for example. Newton's theory said gravity is a force. Was he wrong? No, it was approximately true. His equations work perfectly well for sending rockets to the moon. Then Einstein came along and gave us a more true picture, showing that gravity is actually the curvature of space-time. See, Einstein didn't erase Newton. He refined him, corrected him, and built on his work. That's not a reset, that's progress. And what's really interesting is that Kuhn himself later said that he never meant for his work to be interpreted in such a radical, anti-realist way. The evidence is just overwhelming. Science shows cumulative progress. We really are getting closer and closer to a true account of how the world works. So all of this brings us to our final and maybe our most important point. If it's true that the universe is real and that it's knowable, we have to ask the question, why? Why should a universe that supposedly came from a random bang be so logical and orderly and intelligible to us? Well, from a Christian perspective, this isn't a surprise at all. The reason the universe is logical, ordered, and discoverable is because it was made by a logical, orderly, and rational creator. And because we are made in the imago Dei, in the very image of God, we have minds that are capable of discovering the amazing order that he put there. We aren't just making up order out of chaos. We are uncovering a pre-existing divinely created design. And that, right there, is the ultimate takeaway. The world is not some shifting, subjective illusion that depends on us. It is stable, it is knowable, and it is shared. You are not crazy for believing that the chair you're sitting on is real. In the end, the deepest reason we can have confidence in an objective reality is because it's the creation of an objective, real God. Because he is real, reality is real.